All right. Shall we start? Continue. All right. So, as you can see, we can debate all these issues for kingdom come, which is why I love teaching economic growth and development. I think I had some admin stuff. Oh, yes. Does everyone have Stata on their laptops? Okay, so I think Claudine, just speak to Claudine to see. Okay, did she say she's going to try and find? Excellent, good. And then, but that's for Thursday, so you're still okay. And then, what else was there? I think on Friday we are in a. On Friday, is this yours? On Friday, we are in a different venue, but she'll show you on Thursday. We're at Graduate Center because we didn't have this venue. I will just warn you, Graduate Center does tend to be a bit cold, so just bring your jackets. I'll try and ask the IT guys to lower the temperature, but then the problem is that it's a small room, so it then tends to get quite stuffy. So yeah, we'll see how the temperatures work. Me, I'm from Africa. I don't like cold, so I'm quite happy to be uncomfortable and hot than cold. And you know that there's literature that talks about temperatures coming from temperate and cold climates. So the geography, and they say one of the reasons that Africa might be lagging behind in economic growth is because we come from this tropical climate where it's very hot. So people tend to be, very relaxed, lazy, not really productive, and all of that. And also, we are more prone to the diseases, right? So the diseases that the animals have that can transfer to your population and make your population unhealthy. There's a whole literature on it. And every time I discuss it, my students are like, no, no, man, we don't agree.
It says that then the oppressors or the global north would come and just extract our resources because they cannot relocate and be amongst us.
Yes, they couldn't. Yes. So they were dying in their numbers when they came here. So because they couldn't relocate in certain areas, the institutions they implemented were extractive and they would go back. And then they were saying that, well, if you're in the global north, because it's so cold, you sometimes you can't go outside, so you have nothing else to do but to be innovative and come up with ideas of how to keep yourself warm. It was very interesting. I mean, these papers, I read these papers and I'm like, yeah, okay, some of these theories, eh? I mean, there's even one called ignorance hypothesis, where they say, well, sometimes leaders are just ignorant to the fact about, ignorant about how policies work in their countries and everything. So that's why you find this. You find that some countries really struggle with their institutions. If you read that one, I read about it in Asimoglu and Robinson's book, Why Nations Fail. So they discuss quite a number of different hypotheses that have been put forward. I mean, obviously, they won the Nobel laureate because of their hypothesis about institutions and the relevance of institutions in economic development. Okay, so now let's look at empirical evidence about, our growth and development patterns over time. So I used, is it not on? Okay, here we go. So this is Madison. So if you want like GDP per capita and population long run, you can find it on Madison. I think it goes all the way to 1,000. So you can, but it's not for all the countries. Obviously, as always, your global north countries will always have a bias in having better data than global south, right? But you do get long run data. And this Madison project database also has long run data on population size and population growth, I think. So, I mean, you can already see, right, that prior to the 1800s, incomes were relatively similar in the world, right? But around the 1820s, this is what happened. right? And of course, one of the reasons they put forward is that the Industrial Revolution became very prominent, and this then helped some regions to take off, especially your Western offshoots and Western Europe, right? So your Western offshoots would be Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. So these are your Western offshoots are the countries where the Europeans settled because the climate, the geography, the ecology was more favorable for them. And they say that where they settled, they went with their institutions, which were good institutions. They were productive and they helped those Western offshoots to develop. But then when you look at the countries that were colonized, South Asia, South America, Africa, we have been struggling to catch up once the takeoff started. But East Asia, oh sorry, spelling mistake. East Asia has been starting to converge with the developed countries. So we also observe convergence, right? So we see this regions started growing at different rates over time, and some regions were able to converge while others have really been struggling. So this is why there's now this whole field in understanding the differences in economic growth and development in the world, right? So if you look at this is per capita in 2023 using world development indicators from the World Bank, you can see the massive difference, right? So this is an average person's income annual. So this is your annual average income. And you can see that someone in North America is earning that much compared to someone in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. That's massive, right? And the world average is 11,000, but it's being pulled down by your developing regions because you've got a significantly higher number of countries that are struggling compared to the countries that are wealthy. And the wealthy countries obviously have to try and share, to try and help the developing countries, hence the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, where the developed countries they also have a responsibility to ensure that no one is left behind, right? So their responsibility is where they can provide the resources, they provide the resources. And we saw that with the COVID-19 pandemic, where they had to, not even the COVID-19 pandemic only, HIV as well, right? The HIV pandemic as well with the ARVs that, they are developed in the developed countries with the technology, and then they have to share that the medicines and the technologies with the rest of the world, so that your populations are also able to survive some of these pandemics. So this is Gapminder. Seeing how countries are growing over time, I always find is quite it gives a nice visualization. So I chose United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan because they had the World War II. So as we look at the trends, you'll see where they dipped, and yet they were able to recover and still become wealthy countries. And then then I've got Russia, China, Venezuela, South Africa, and Nigeria. So these are, you've got your really poor countries like in per capita terms like Nigeria, right? And you can see where Nigeria was doing well and then it drops. Venezuela, it's even worse because Venezuela used to be one of the richest countries and it's now one of the poorest countries. And then you can see in relation to this how South Africa's growth trend has been developing since the 1800s, right? So this is Gapminder. These are nice if you're lecturing or if you're presenting. It's always nice to show this when you're trying to make a point that these countries, some started at lower incomes per capita and they increased. And I mean, you can see South Africa, right? South Africa was really, it was pulling its weight for some time. Japan, I think when we get to the 1940s, you should see the drop from world, there you go, from the World War in all your developed countries. Look at that. But look at how they recovered. And then Venezuela should start dropping. Look at that. Like dropped completely. And so it's interesting to know. And they have oil. So they've got a resource curse, right? Nigeria, yes.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing a dropping trend on all these countries due to the 2008 2009 global financial crisis.
It won't be an observable one, but you can sort of see these slight dips, and the dips will be more in the developed economies because they felt it more than the developing countries as well. But you can see there are slight dips here, which would be you can see the slight dips, and this is like 2000. So but it won't be that obvious because it's such a long trend, but it is there. But the interesting ones, the really shock, it's, you can see, look at Japan is red. I mean, it dropped below South Africa during World War II. And then look how it managed to get back onto its growth path to still catch up to UK, to these other countries that are involved in the war, right? And then South Africa is actually not doing bad from the 1800s. We had a bit of a blip here, but then I'm going to assume this is during when did the apartheid regime start? Huh? 1948. Look at this. During apartheid, the country was growing, guys. Huh? And then look what happened here when apartheid stopped. I'm not saying anything. Anyway, okay. So that's just showing you that we've got differences in growth rates. So for countries to have differences in income per capita, it means they have different growth rates. So their average growth rates were different, right? And then the other, yes.
What's the criteria for the selection of those countries?
Oh, I just wanted to show the ones that had that were involved in the World War II, that they dropped, but they were able to recover and still grow. So I'm sort of building.
I think you get my thinking.
Yeah.
You know my thinking?
No, I don't know your thinking.
I was just take around like I'm writing a paper.
Okay.
So you are presenting whatever. So you need to tell the reader the criteria for the selection of those countries. Maybe for those African countries, I say those most prominent.
I see what you mean. Okay. So I chose, okay, I know what you mean. So I chose, well, South Africa, I chose it because we are in South Africa and I wanted us to see in relation how South Africa is trending in relation to other countries. I chose those four because they had the World War and that devastated their countries, the World War II. So they fell off their development path, their trajectory. And I wanted to show you that even though, like Japan, dropped, it was still able to recover. So the question is, how come other countries, such as us, and we're talking about our historical events, how come we are not recovering to be able to converge with these countries that also had their own devastating historical event, right? You can see, and then Nigeria and Venezuela, it's the oil, that both of them have resource curse, right? And with Venezuela, I think Venezuela's oil might have been discovered a lot. I don't know if it was earlier or later than Nigeria, but you can see with Venezuela here, when their discovery of the oil affected their or whatever policies they put in place. We'll discuss. I've put Venezuela as a case study at the end for us to discuss. Yes, sir, and then I can see. Yes.
Thanks. My only challenge with that plan for South Africa, it means nothing
Yep.
because we are the most unequal economy globally. And yet, if you look at that GDP per capita, you would believe that all is well. So I do want to challenge the academics among ourselves here and the technocrats out there that we need to not always be fooled by such statistics. I'm not saying they are fooling us, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
So,
To level the ground.
yeah. So thank you for bringing that up, because that's also what I wanted to point out. Is the discussion we had about is GDP a suitable measure? I'm going to show you measures of development, where you'll see that there is improvement in the regions where these countries are, even though they're, like you're saying with South Africa, that sometimes this GDP per capita, it might not actually tell the accurate or the true story about what's happening in that country. So we're going to get to that data as well. Yes, ma'am.
Mine is just a comment. I would have loved to see the trend of Ghana also there, because when we talk about gold, like Ghana,
Yes.
gold production number.
Well, that's very easy. Let's do it. You want to see where Ghana is? Let's see where Ghana is. All right, so there are our countries. Let me remove Nigeria so that we don't have too many. I'll remove Russia. Which else? Shall I remove Venezuela? Okay, you've seen it. Okay, so shall
I don't agree on removing Venezuela. We need to get to understand what exactly happened there.
in Venezuela?
Was it internal conflicts? Was it geopolitical relations?
Yeah, so there was it was the reforms they put in place when they had the oil, which actually didn't benefit the wealth of the country, but they've also got other issues. So it was the oil, and there was instability as well, and the institutions that were in place were not conducive for the wealth, for the resource rents they were getting from the oil. Do I have Ghana? Okay, we've got Ghana, right? Okay, let's see. So there's Ghana. Ghana was even poorer than Nigeria. Ghana was poorer than Nigeria. And then what happened? Ghana gained its independence when? 1950. Okay, so let's see if you guys start growing then.
The trend for South Africa makes sense there between 1860 and 1880 during the mineral discovery.
Yes. And do you see Ghana almost caught up to South Africa? It surpassed South Africa for a bit. And then look at that. So where is Ghana now? Where are we going to end? So you are between Nigeria and Venezuela. That is, I think so. But Nigeria is disappointing me. I really think there's potential in Nigeria. So another thing is, again, this whole Western bias in terms of measuring wealth, right? So the GDP, so we've already said it's not an accurate measure. It's not a suitable, it's not that it's not suitable. It's one of the objective measures that is international, globally accepted as a measure of standard of living, right? But we are trying to say, let's also use other measures. So this one is a dollar street, and here you see the differences in development across countries based on whatever you want, right? So apparently they say stoves. So the type of stoves you have. So in Kenya, this is what they have. If you go to a rich country, right, this is within Africa, right? And we know South Africa has got a higher income per capita than Kenya, right? So that's a measure of development. And then here, but then look at this one. They've got like 1,742, and look what they're cooking on. I don't know what that is. That's in India. So again, is that it's a subjective measure, right? Because most of us are moving back to the gas stove because electricity is so expensive. So is that using gas doesn't mean you're not wealthy or you're poor, right? So another one, yes, ma'am, you've got your hand.
So with this, like the dollar street, is it like a measure backed up by literature? Because like when you said other measure, I thought of like a Gini code.
Yes. So it is because they're just saying that this is what you expect to find. So they say poor people have poor teeth. Let's go to teeth. Yeah, that's what they say. So they say because you don't have access to health. Yeah. So look at that. Look at that, right? This is what they're saying. I mean, this dollar street is very interesting. When I discovered it, I thought, wow, they even have hands. And they say poor people because you work so hard, your hands are meant to be tough and looking, and I'm thinking, well, I'm in a sort of middle income and my hands are already rough. It doesn't necessarily mean that, so it's very fascinating, these subjective measures of somebody's well-being, and this like dollar street I think it's a Gapminder takes information from different sources like World Bank, yeah, they're credible sources because that's where we get our GDP per capita from. Yes, ma'am, and then I saw yes. Okay.
I wanted to ask if you can download this data and use it.
Yes, you can. You can download from Gapminder. Gapminder is actually just a database where they've got the different data sets like World Bank. So it tells you where it got it from. If they got it from UNESCO, the United Nations Education website, or if they got wherever they got the data from, they tell you the actual source. So you also have the option to go to the actual source to get the data as well. Yes, sir, and then Oh, you've been covered. Okay, yes.
I'm just curious where the other charts would be.
The GDP one. Oh, sorry, I had closed it. Let me go back to it. So you can also show, that Gapmind also shows the different, yeah, okay, on this one. Is this the one? Yeah.
I'm just curious, the chart starting from 1800.
Especially for your poor countries. Yes. So he's questioning where the data starts, that it's in the 1800s, and he's questioning because he's saying, well, some countries didn't have data at that time. What was interesting, and you're so right, because when I looked at World Bank and I tried to find Venezuelan data on GDP, it doesn't have. World Bank doesn't have Venezuela. And I was surprised. So I came to this Gapminder and they had it. And I was like, I wonder where they got it from. So they're pulling it. So you can actually, if you click on the data, they tell you where they got their data from. So yeah, so we do have to be, obviously, when you're using data, it has to come from a credible source, right? And we know the credible sources. Your country statistics, it would be Stats SA here, it would be, exactly South African Reserve Bank, and then also your global, your international, like your IMF, your World Bank, United Nations. They will have WHO, they will have credible statistics, but always bear in mind that it was collected by humans and human error is possible.
I just want to add to that. Then I'm not sure whether we will cover this topic session about data, because I think it's an area in which Africa is mentioned, because some of the research and the work that I've done on data with like hopefully countries stimulate capacity to collect.
Yes.
So it's very second period of living in terms of we do the general much salary and so other countries are not able to do.
Yeah.
So to be able to trace a lot of development is
Yeah, yeah. And that's why you'll find a lot of papers that use data from developing countries. There's always that disclaimer that the reason why I chose these countries is due to data availability. They were the only ones that had data, the others didn't. But it is true, exactly what you're saying. It's very true. We are at a disadvantage, which is why I always have a problem when they do an analysis on a global, let's say they're writing a paper on differences in the world, and they clump Africa there with them, or they use Africa as a dummy. I always have issues with that because the results they're getting are heavily weighted on the Western countries, the global north, that have data. So they're going to carry the results. So it may not necessarily mean that institutions are good for economic growth. If you pull out Africa and run Africa on its own, you find that institutions have no effect on economic growth or something like that, right? So that's why, for me, I usually want to do you have to be cognizant of the different issues that are affecting the regions that you want to discuss in your paper, and you have to separate them out to show. You can first say, okay, globally this is what it's saying. However, when I look at the North America versus South America, you'll find you get differences. When I look at Africa versus this, there are differences in how this factor is affecting economic growth in that particular region, because there are different climates, different population, different culture, different geography, and different historical issues that happened within those regions. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And to add to that, like there was a debate on stories being told by people who've never been here. Because when you attend like some open conferences, there are people that write about like maybe minibus taxis in Johannesburg, but they've never, experienced it. So I think like that data constraint is one of the reasons, because they have like the resources per se, to actually conduct data.
Yeah.
Research.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think you mentioned about crime, if crime is measured in the GDP. Some countries have good crime statistics, right? I've seen in the US, they have really good, they've got a whole database on just criminal, and they split them by different types of crime. If it's violent crime, murder, sexual violence and everything, but we don't have that, right? So I mean, we can go to SAPS if you want to get as accurate as possible, but most of the times they are also going to tell you that, well, this is what we have, and it's not going to be an accurate reflection of the actual crime that's taking place, right? I mean, rape statistics are highly underreported, because there are a lot of people that they won't report it because they also feel victimized when they go to the police to report. So we do have to be very responsible when we are using data in writing our story, because you cannot claim causality. That is the biggest issue. You cannot claim causality. So you have to be specific about the mechanism that you think that this particular factor is affecting your outcome variable. There has to be a mechanism, and that mechanism has to be supported by theories, which is why we're going to cover some of those theories, right? To help you in, when you're discussing economic growth, that, oh yeah, there's this theory that discussed this, and, are my results sort of aligning with that or not, and why are they not aligning with that particular theory, right? So the frameworks are very important when the theoretical backing and background is very important when you're writing papers.
So, talking about the data, when there's some missing data, some people use interpolation.
Yeah, I've seen that.
To populate the data. What do you say to it?
everyone has to find a way to to use the data, right? Personally, I'm not really a fan of interpolation, trying to fill in the missing data. It is what it is, right? The data is missing. You just acknowledge it and mention it in the paper that could be a weakness. But also what you're highlighting is that is a gap where policy reform is important as well. We need to have good data collection taking place in our countries. I mean, I can't remember with Zim. I would be surprised if they've got anything beyond 2018 or 2019 in terms of accurate data, because once we hit the hyperinflation, the data, you wouldn't trust the data coming from anything after that. You wouldn't trust the data, right? And that's the other thing, is that the data is also an opportunity for our politicians to fudge the numbers. So, we have to keep all of these things in mind. But anyway, all right. So yes.
Anyway, speaking of data, I just had something to say because when I was doing my studies, I was using data from Zimbabwe. So my supervisors actually gave me a choice to say, you are not supposed to submit your proposal up until you showed us the data that you're going to use, because they normally have problems with people using data from Zim.
Yeah.
And I faced so many challenges to get them data, even though the data was available. So you have a situation where some countries don't have the data at all. Then others, they have the data, but they can't give you because they have to protect themselves. They feel like they're going to use the data for political reasons.
Yes.
Or to tarnish the image of the country.
Yeah.
So there are different types of data issues
Yeah.
that we are more likely to face.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes the data is available. It's just very difficult to get it, and it becomes who you know. And that's the sad thing, because Global North, their data is just publicly available. You can find anything. It's like they're like, we have nothing to hide, right? So things we learn, things we learn for us that are really passionate about making a change in our continent. All right. So those stats, and I'm going to go through others as well. Those stats, they provide us with some stylized facts. First of all, countries grow at different rates. We saw that. And because they're growing at different rates, it means they're going to accumulate wealth at different times, right? Secondly, countries can move from being rich to poor. We saw that, and vice versa, right? And then also in most countries that have grown significantly in the past, what we find, and here I'm talking about your East Asian countries, what you find is that their economies went through this structural change where they shifted from a high share of employment in the agricultural sector into a high share of employment in the manufacturing sector, right? So that's the structural change that we expect to observe, because that's what we saw in the Western countries, and we also observed it with some of our Eastern Asian countries like Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong. But is it the path that should be followed by every other country? Because what we are observing with Africa is Africa's structural change is completely different. We are skipping manufacturing sector and going straight into services sector, right? So that's also one of those interesting discussions as well about, do we follow the same development paths as countries or as regions? And if we are not following the same development paths, why is that? And is it good or bad for the future of the country, right? You can also use, so these are different types of data sets you can use to measure economic growth, development. So you can use night lights, satellite lights. What they are showing you is the location of permanent lights on the Earth's surface. And obviously, I don't need to explain, the brightest areas are the most urbanized, but not necessarily the most populated as well, right? So I mean, you can see that, right? Look at that. This is global north, guys. Yeah, here's global south. We know Australia has got a lot of desert, right? So you also have to take into account where there's a lot of deserts, you won't see a lot of lights, right? But in Southern Africa, you can see, yeah. And northern, obviously, this will be your oil wealth, obviously. And, you know, north is very connected to the Arab states as well. And speaking of, I can't remember who was saying that Africa was trading way before the Westerners came. It's true. North Africa was trading a lot with with Asia and Middle East prior to the whole colonial area. Okay, so poor infrastructure, right? So this is a sign of poor infrastructure in our less wealthy countries. And then we also have another measurement, Human Development Index. This is an index that has been aggregated, and it includes GNI per capita, GDP per capita. It includes life expectancy, and they've also measured schooling as well. So it's looking at health outcomes, education outcomes, and your wealth, the wealth outcomes. And they've aggregated it into an index that goes from 0 to 1. 1 is the highest possible human development. 0, obviously, you are not doing well. So 1 is the dark blue. And again, you can see the blues especially the dark blues. And here's Australia as well. In the dark blues, it's your northern, your global north. And then Africa, you know, but we do have some human development taking place, right? And the thing is, are we really struggling? Right, so our GDP per capita is showing us that in comparison to the other regions, Africa and South Asia are lagging behind. Yes, we agree with that. But in terms of development, these different aspects, are we really doing that bad? And I would like to say no, right? Over time, you can see Sub-Saharan Africa, our infant mortality rates have dropped drastically. So we have really made impressive inroads into ensuring that our children at birth are not dying. And that is a sign of development taking place. You know, I know all of the regions, global regions, are showing downwards, but you can see that with Sub-Saharan Africa, it's quite steep compared to the others, to show that we really pushed. Yes, it might also come from, you know, help from the Western, from the global North in terms of medications, but we are making progress, guys. So your Human Development Index globally, Sub-Saharan Africa is the dark line, right? So yes, we are lagging behind in terms of our HDI, but again, I think you can see that, you know, in terms of our schooling, we are trying our best. Life expectancy, we are trying our best, although we are really, oh my God, this is 2020 and we are like below 60. Guys, I'm like 4 years away from 50. And it's saying that's when I'm going to die. No. This is from world development. So maybe someone made an error when they were capturing data for Africa. In terms of, we know in terms of GDP per capita, we are not doing well. But then also you have to look at the scale as well. So, you know, these countries are really, the scale is going to be high. So it almost seems like there's no change, but there is change there. But I do like the fact that we are seeing improvement in our human capital and in our health as well, especially for the infant mortality rate, because that was the biggest issue, and I mean it was one of the Millennium Development Goals, was that to ensure that there was infant mortality was reduced drastically, right? And you can see that it helped. We really put in a lot of effort into improving infant mortality rates, and also a Millennium Development Goal was to ensure that everyone had access to primary education. And if I did the primary completion rates, Sub-Saharan Africa's primary completion rates are almost close there in the 90 percentile. So we are doing really well in that aspect. Obviously, Millennium Development Goals, which were meant to have been achieved by 2015, never happened. So what did we do? We extended them and we increased them to sustainable development goals. And they are meant to be achieved in 2030. And we are in 2025, guys.
There's also Agenda 2063.
I saw that one. They are preparing. They know that 2030 is coming. We won't have met some of these things. But anyway, I think the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals is that there are clear objectives that we need to try and achieve as countries. And how we achieve those is then now coming down to our internal factors and the external influences within the countries. Ideally, we would like our internal factors to be good enough to develop our countries. But what we observe is that for a lot of the poor countries, that's not the fact. And then the external influence comes in. But now this external influence, how does it interact with the internal factors? Because sometimes the external influence dismantles what was in place in your country, and they superimpose their model. And that model may not work for your development path, right? So we're talking about structural change. We are all expected to move from agriculture to manufacturing to services. But clearly that model isn't working for Africa. Why is it? Why are we just going straight into the services?
People who are leading us today, they always convince us to say like democracy is a way. Why don't you find democracy is not the way to reach those kind of goals? This is a separated comment, I know, but this is where I come from.
Yeah, no, it's there is literature on that where they say they talk about benevolent dictators, that you don't necessarily have to be a democracy to grow. So democracy is it's not a necessary condition, it's just a sufficient condition to grow. But it's not necessary for you to be democratic to grow. So you can have growth in, look at China, right? So, yeah. So definitely your point is relevant in this discussion. Okay, so this table here, I just wanted to sort of hone in what I was saying about. So I just looked. I took the how they've classified these countries, a few of the countries in the world. When your income, you're using GDP per capita only. Human development, you are now bringing in other aspects of development. And I wanted to show you that, yes, sometimes when your income per capita is high, you'll also have high, growth goes with development. But you also find instances where countries with low income per capita, but they have relatively high development. So if you look at Uganda, it's been classified as a low income per capita, but its human development is actually relatively high. It's been classified as medium, which is not bad. You also have Egypt, Philippines, and Vietnam. They've been classified as lower middle income countries. And sorry, lower middle income means you're earning, the average annual income is 1,146 for lower middle. And to 4,515. But they've got high human development, right? So there are certain aspects of their development, whether it's the access to education, access to better health outcomes, that's pushing their HDI. So I just wanted you to be, to be aware and cognizant of the fact that your GDP per capita, as we have been saying, is sometimes not an accurate or not capturing development accurately, which is why we try and separate economic growth from economic development. Yes, sir.
Prof, I'm observing something here, not just from this class, today's class only. I don't often come across data from UAE. What could be the reason behind it?
I don't know. But it is there. The World Bank has on some of the Arab states.
In my class at studies,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
we also observe that your Arab African states that don't form part of the sub-Saharan Africa, Morocco, Algeria, and Uganda, there's also a lot of, I don't know to call it information asymmetry. From the World Bank, there are sources itself. You will have to find enough information.
Yeah. It's very difficult. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know whether it's I doubt it's a religion thing. I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe it's just political.
If I may, my point is, these kind of institutions, they drive certain narrative. Most of the time when they do analysis, they will skew the way they collect their data, they will skew to a certain perspective because they are trying to drive a certain narrative. For example, I can see here, they say South Africa is enjoying high income, but if you can check the demographic, if you can check the real demographic that we are facing as a country, something else. So that's kind of tells you that when they are using these methodologies to collect these types of data, they are using certain, it's more like formulas that favor, even the way they sample their participant or respondent, there's that level of agenda so that you can keep believing, you see. It's more like manipulation, if I may say.
And also I can see your hand. Also what's interesting, was there another hand at the back? Yes, okay, I'll come to you. Speaking about our Arab states, North Africa, which is why we have this term sub-Saharan Africa, because we then cut off the North African, and then World Bank, which I find so frustrating, World Bank clumps it with Arab states, so they call MENA. Middle East, North Africa. But I'm thinking, but they're part of this continent, So I get very frustrated when I'm using world development indicators, because then I have to pull out the North African to add them to the African continent. But I remember when I was doing that, and I can't remember who it was who said, well, the problem why they do that is because North Africa's institutions are completely different to sub-Saharan African institutions. So if you include them in a paper where you're looking at policies and institutions, your results may be biased or affected by the North African influence and the way they view institutions, because they are more aligned with the Middle East Arab states. So, yeah. But then, and it was interesting during World Cup how, when, who was it, we made it into the semi-finals, and all of a sudden Africa was the whole of Africa. It was a North African country, and we were all supporting that. But usually, I've always asked my North African colleagues, I'm like, do you guys, do you like Africa? Are you part of us or not? I don't understand. Yes.
You actually answered or touched on some of what I wanted to say. But in the work I was also doing, I was looking at institutions, insurance specifically. Institutions, although my research was focused on South Africa, in the literature review, you'll read all literature. I had difficulties incorporating
North Africa, yeah.
Because of what you have said. They need a different framework all together. So you'd find that if they speak on insurance, they'll say Islamist insurance. Then when you look at it, it's Islamic banking.
Yes. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
If you take that data and you critically look at it, and then you want to put it together with the data you are using,
Yeah. It's too different. Yeah.
you would then need to choose to do something separately, which would then take the direction of your research to a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I then had a heading to say Islamist.
Yes. Yeah.
them together just to see maybe what things about their quality
Quality. Yes.
or do not work. So it's difficult. I wanted to ask why is that, but you answered that they are different.
Yeah, they are different. Well, that's, yeah. So, and I also picked that up as well when I was doing institutions, that when I include North Africa, the results are skewed. But when I remove them, then there's like sort of a cohesive story that comes out. And it's then easy as well to split Sub-Saharan Africa into your West, East, South, Central countries and see how the institutions within there affect their development outcomes. Yes, ma'am.
I think also their stance to foreign influence
It's different. Yeah, true.
Yeah, so like UAE and the others, the global north does a lot of development and humanitarian service in the global south. And then there are some of these stuff attached to it where you make your data available and all of these things. We want to see what we are doing. But these guys do not really rely on World Bank.
Yeah.
Then they don't have to kiss their ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So they could just do, and a lot of them are not democratic. The UAE is not democratic. They make their rules and they don't care about sharing their data.
So it's also quite interesting, right, that this difference with the North African countries and the rest of Sub-Saharan African countries, where does it stem from? Is it coming now from those historical, we're now going into economic history, that for them their closest trade partners were by the Asian side, because so they then sort of intermingled a lot with the different populations, and that's why there was the assimilation of culture. Whereas with us here, with the migration of the Bantu people, we've got sort of similar cultural aspects, which are completely different to the Arab states. It's quite interesting. Okay, so, yes, sir. There is.
I just came across by the Malthus,
Yeah. So there is data, but on Ethiopia there is data, but I think you need to go to the data, the statistics offices like Stats SA, SAB, and all that to get the data in Ethiopia. But there is data. There is data on Ethiopia. Yeah. And my colleague works a lot on that, and she's able to get the data. Yeah. So if you need data on Ethiopia, let me know. I'll put you in touch with the right people. All right. So we are moving now on to, so now we understand, we've got our definition and measures of economic growth and development. We're able to separate out the two. And we've also just had a brief look at growth patterns and how they're evolving over time in the world. So now we just want to have a basic foundation of the factors that have been put forward, that have been argued by several economists, some of them Nobel laureates, on how countries grow. Some of these Nobel laureates were present during the Great Depression, so they were like they gave advice to the administration that was in power at the time, to say, okay, you need to do this with your fiscal policy, you need to do this with your monetary policy, and somehow those those strategies have remained in place and have been adopted by many other countries that then suffer recessions or suffer inflationary periods, right? So this is what some of the development theories that we're going to discuss are going to cover. There are many, many, many growth theories. I just try to touch on a few that I think with the names are quite, familiar and popular in the literature. And I think what you'll find is that most of them, the underlying factors are actually similar across. It's, they're similar across, and some are just extensions of previous growth theories as we go about, right? And it's important for us to understand the mechanisms that can explain economic growth, the processes and the pathways that can lead to that very important word, sustainable development, because that's what we want. We want sustainable development. We want a sustained growth rate. So we see that in the global north countries, their growth rates are low, but they are consistent. So every year, the country will be growing at maybe 1.6% or 2%, but every year it's the same. Nothing, if it does change, it's within a small bandwidth. But when you look at developing countries, our growth rates are like this. It's crazy. It's crazy, right? But it's showing you that sometimes we have this exponential increase in growth, and then sometimes we've got this like massive drop in growth, right? Why are we not able to also just have a consistent average growth? Because why is it important to have a consistent growth rate? It creates certainty in the future, because you know that, okay, next year, if I adjust for the inflation, this is what's going to happen. I can make my decisions, my investment decisions, or whatever you want to do. It creates certainty. But now when you have this uncertainty where you're like, hey, last year was bad in this country, so now should I invest? Should I buy that house? Here, those interest rates could go up. There's uncertainty. And this delays people's decisions. It affects people's decisions. And then you find people deciding, you know what, it's fine, I'll buy property in Switzerland. Because at least I know there, the property rates are not going to increase. Right now, a big issue in Zimbabwe, property rates. They keep increasing them. You see? But you're squeezing your citizens. You're squeezing those people who want to invest in property. You're squeezing the foreign investor who wants to come in and buy property in South Africa. And when they buy property in South Africa, that property tax is going into the South African economy. It's going into the country's economy, right? But now there's no certainty because every year something is happening. So this is why it's important for us to have a sustained economic growth rate. And these theories try to explain how we can go about achieving economic growth. So the most popular or the most influential economic growth theories are obviously your classical, neoclassical, and modern in the endogenous growth models, right? I've put these slides already in the, I hope you guys received the Google link. Yeah, so the slides are there, right?
But were you guys able to download?
Yes.
Were you able to download?
It wasn't. Which? I tried last night, I couldn't.
Try again today. If you can't, just I can email them to you. Yeah, they're not that many. Okay, so your classical economists obviously argue the importance of economic growth is found in understanding how economies produce and trade. So your classical economies were all about free trade and markets being able to self-regulate themselves, right? They didn't like to advocate for government intervention. And then you've got your neoclassical economists, and we will discuss one of the, where are we? Sorry. We will discuss the one model in detail tomorrow of the neoclassical, which is Solo's model, because Solo is, one of the, it's actually the solo swan model, but it's called the solo growth model. So they were concerned about understanding the synergy between capital accumulation and labor productivity and how technology affects the efficiency of the labor. And then we've got our modern growth theory, which was then extension of the neoclassical economists or economic theory. And here they were emphasizing the importance of human capital and innovation as an essential element of growth. My favorite are the modern, obviously, growth theory, because they speak about human capital. Because I think that is a very critical element of economic growth. We can have capital accumulation, we can have infrastructure, we can have the labor, but if your labor doesn't have the skills and is not educated, will they be able to use the technology that you're importing, or even the technology that you're domestically producing? That's where for me, that was where I thought, okay, this was a critical addition to the growth models that made sense for me, right? And then that was then also linked to incentives. And when you start talking about incentives, you start talking about the policies that are in place. Do they incentivize people to be productive? Do they incentivize people to invest in human capital? Do you have an incentive to get an education, to get a technical skill in your country? Are they creating those incentives? Are they creating an environment where you think, okay, I need to get an electrician certificate so that I can enter that market? Or those incentives are not there, right? Our earliest growth theory, obviously, when you are within this literature, is the mercantilism, right? So the mercantilism was an economic system of trade that advocated for trade surplus. So governments had to impose heavy tariffs on imports. Government had to regulate trade so that you could have a trade surplus, and that's how you built your wealth and the national power of the country. So you needed to export more than you imported. And during this era, the belief was that the world had limited wealth, right, in the form of gold and silver. So what did they have to do? They had to accumulate gold. They had to accumulate gold in order to grow. And in order for them to build their stores of gold that they did not have, what did it mean? It meant they had to go and find that gold at the expense of others. So there was a form of, so your colonies became important for supplying those natural resources and for supplying the labor to use the gold to create goods, right? And in this era as well, your military became important for protectionism. You had to protect your trade routes from other people. And in this era, as you can see, restricted trade between colonies, because you were going to disrupt those trade patterns with the mother country. Why didn't this stick? Why didn't this type of school of thought stick? Why are we not using this or still sort of following this model in today's world? Yes, so they lost their colonies. Exporting more than you import. That was their trade. You needed a trade surplus. And for you to have a trade surplus, it means your exports have to be higher than your imports. So they had very heavy import tariffs at that time. They protected. There was a very strong trade protectionism taking place. That was the model of the mercantilists, yes.
Wasn't this growth that disturbed by David Ricardo
and Adam Smith? Yes, yes, it was. They disturbed it. Yes.
So basically, the theory was flawed.
Yes. So exactly, you're right. The theory was flawed first of all, obviously, exploitation of countries' wealth was never going to be a sustainable strategy. Resources run out, right? We saw if you look at Haiti, the French completely extracted the resource from Haiti and then left the country, and now it's like one of the poorest islands on the ocean. So it's a zero-sum game, right? As countries, we benefit from each other. We have to trade because there is going to be a good that you can't produce in your country, right? And you are going to need to import that. And maybe you're going to need to import an input that you need to use to produce a good that you export, right? So that strategy was never going to work of being self-sufficient. It's nice to think about and to have, but it wasn't a viable, a sustainable type of growth theory, right? And also, as you said, the fact that sometimes you need the government to intervene, right? And but then you also don't want the government to intervene to the extent that they crowd out private investment, right? And for them, because they had such heavy import tariffs, this was affecting the growth of the countries, right? So this was met with severe condemnation by the classical economists, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, because the classical economists were all about, no, if you leave the markets alone, they will self-regulate. The supply, the demand will then equal the supply, right? So if there's enough demand, the supply will catch up, and similarly. So then that brought us into the classical theories, where you've got Adam Smith and, the David Ricardo, Thomas Malthus, Joseph Schumpeter, and probably several other names there as well that I didn't mention, right? So their emphasis, the classical economists, was on technology leading to division of labor and specialization of labor. So the introduction of the Industrial Revolution made this even more prominent, because with the Industrial Revolution, you could divide your labor between innovation and between producing the goods, right? So your labor became specialized. So there's an example I always like to show my students when I'm teaching this particular growth theory on the specialization of labor is the Ford assembly line. So when Ford came up with the assembly line, he had noticed that all the workers would be standing at one spot, and everyone will be working on the car, at the same time. So only one car would be produced maybe in like 2 or 3 hours. So what he decided was he created an assembly line, and you would stand here and your job was to put the wheels. Then it moves down the line and there's a group of technicians there. Their job is to put the doors and that. Move down, you put the windows. Move down, you put the engine. Move down, you paint it. So you became specialized, and when you're specialized, you're quicker at your job. You end up doing it just like this. And by doing that, he increased the productivity of the number of cars he could produce in an hour. And when he was able to increase the production of, it was the T model, when he was able to increase the production of cars, the number of cars he was making, guess what happened to the price of the car? It dropped, because he's now making a whole lot more and is able to cover his costs and is able to drop the price. Whereas before it was one of the most expensive cars before this innovative, right? So the division of labor and the specialization and labor becoming specialized was a critical extension of the growth theory, right? And also the classical economies they did not like government intervention because they said the government reduces incentives for firms to be innovative, to be productive, and it reduces competition in the economy. So they were all about markets generally regulating themselves. So this is your classical theory, where your output is a function of land, N is your land, labor, capital, and technology, right? The model does have diminishing returns to capital. So that means that the assumption is that every country has a maximum level of income that they will reach. So if you carry on increasing additional units of factors of production, your output is going to increase by less and less and less until you reach your maximum income. And when you reach your maximum income, you just maintain that income, right? So already you can see that there's a weakness because we've seen that, countries continue to develop. Land and one of the reasons for that weakness as well is that these were exogenous. They were given, they were fixed. So it was not an endogenous, it wasn't an internal factor, basically. Something that you could grow, right? So only capital was an endogenous factor. It was an internal factor, and they wanted to understand how capital accumulates. But it's not only about your capital accumulating, right? You also need to know how do you accumulate technology. You also know how much you can get, how much return can you get out of your land when you have extra capital, when you have extra technology. But unfortunately, these were they were static, basically. They didn't change. And another issue as well was the labor as well was given. But basically at the end of the day, the classical theory was based on your capital accumulation, right? The higher the rate that you're investing in your physical accumulation, the faster the increase of economic growth. But because of diminishing marginal returns, as you continue to increase your capital, your economy is growing less and less and less. So Adam Smith, that is his famous paper, into the causes of the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. So according to Smith, we have economic agents in the economy, right? We've got landlords, they own the land. We've got your capitalists, these are your firms, right? So these are the ones that are going to be investing in physical infrastructure. And they own the capital used in the production process. And then you've got labor, which is us, right? The population you own your physical labor. They believed that these economic agents act in their own interest. And when they act in their own interest, what does it create? It creates productivity, social cohesion, which contributes to economic growth. And this is Smith coined this the invisible hand, right? So when you, with your labor, or let's say you're a firm or an entrepreneur, you live in your community and you decide, you know what, I want to open a corner store where I sell, goods, bread, milk, and everything. In order to create your corner store, you need builders, right? So you're going to employ builders to build your corner store. Once you've got your corner store, you need people to help you inside, to stock the shelves, to man the till when people come in. So that was your own idea, your own self-interest, but you've created employment. So this is what they were saying, is that your own self-interest, if you leave these economic agents to come up with their ideas, they're going to work and create and contribute to economic growth. So they were very much in favor of a laissez-faire type of approach where the markets operated freely without government intervention. And an important issue, an important creator of wealth was labor, as I just explained, right? Because when you increase your production level, then your production level was dependent on the size of your labor force, the labor size. So if you wanted increased production, it meant you had a higher, exactly, labor size of the labor force in the economy. But it was not only about the size of the labor, it was also about how specialized they were, which would also help you with increasing the economic growth, right? So therefore, your owners of the firms, they have incentives to invest in physical capital because they know that there's labor that can then come and work and create, or they specialized labor that can come and work and create and produce goods and services, right? And therefore, they believed that bureaucrats or your government, it was unproductive labor. For them, that was unproductive labor because bureaucrats did not contribute to capital accumulation. But your physical labor, they contributed because they worked with the infrastructure to produce goods and services. And that's where as well Adam Smith's favor of free trade, that absolute advantage trade theory comes from. It was based on this reasoning. The larger the market, then the greater with the possibilities for more specialization. So with trade, you could increase your specialization in the good that you were able to produce in your economy. And that's also linked to David Ricardo as well, right? In this era as well, we then also have Thomas Malthus. I do like Thomas Malthus because sometimes I look at his theory and I think, if we followed this theory, there would be no people in the world, right? So Thomas Malthus believed that capitalism created inequalities, right, between those with the resources, obviously, those that own the land, and those who didn't own the land. So there's this inequality between your rich, which were the landlords, and your poor, which are the peasants that are working the land. This is the labor, right? So that's why during the 1700s, there was the Luddite revolt, where these were workers that worked the land of the landlords, your barons, your land barons, and they destroyed all the machines because they believed that the machines were replacing them. The technology was replacing them. So that's where you get your creative destruction as well from Joseph Schumpeter's model, where there's this trade-off between introducing technologies and how do those technologies interact with the physical labor. And that's where your trade unions also come in. Because if there is any kind of innovation that's coming that is going to replace or has a potential of replacing labor, you find your trade unions push back. So I can give you an example, the e-tolls. That there was a big brouhaha with the e-tolls in South Africa, but that was one of the reasons. The trade unions were like, so now what are we going to do with the people that were actually manning the toll gates that had jobs? They're now out of jobs. So there's that trade-off between new technology and labor, right? So anyway, so Thomas Malthus was like, okay, the solution to reduce inequalities was to control the population. Because if your population is growing faster than you're accumulating capital, then that economy is not able to sustain its growing population. So his solution, and if you're not able to sustain your population, the inequalities are going to continue increasing. Some people are getting richer while others are getting poorer. So his solution was, let's control the growth of the population. And he had all sort of different ways, such as reducing birth rates, etc. And so his argument was that when there's a temporary increase in income in the country, there's a population explosion. Because when you've got more money, you are richer, and you can improve your standard of living. And during that era, remember, education was not an incentive yet. So, and your agriculture was still your agriculture, and your manufacturing at that time didn't need human capital. You needed physical labor. So, when you're richer, you have more children. This was his argument, that when a country is richer, we see that the population is growing. But the problem is that because, remember the constraint, land is fixed, technology is fixed. So your diminishing marginal returns set in, right? So as your population is growing, you find that you are unable to continue to sustain your population because the resources are fixed. So the returns from each output become smaller and smaller and smaller, and your population starts suffering. And then what would happen is that your population standard of living would start to deteriorate, your infant mortality increases because health is now poor, your population is now lower, your income also drops, right? So there was this sort of vicious cycle. They call it the Malthusian stagnation, where countries were stuck in there. More money, more problems. Huh? More children. Economy can't sustain it. People start dying or starving. The economy drops, income drops. Yes. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thanks for asking about something that is a little bit common on I think one of the things is asking I look at the concept of states. I really not in that on the problem of the population that grows faster than steel production. But I honestly think that food is becoming more expensive and not accessible somehow. And I want to get into what the classicals defining economic welfare. I suspect subjectivity. Because the minute we are saying the interests are different, depending on which pension they are referring to, I really do not think that the interest of the consumers really matter to the firm.
Yes. Yes. They need, for firms, it's profits. Yeah.
The firm would not want to give you so much that you are able to afford everything. I'm not sure if
No, you are.
I'm just trying to say it makes sense for the firm to pay you less, and what goes on is that you are going to be unable to afford the bottle of water.
Yes.
So I don't really see economic welfare being what would afford or that what would benefit the economic agents.
So that was the problem, right? With which is why Thomas Malthus then came up with his theory about controlling the population, right? Because he was saying exactly what you're saying, that because people have different incentives, it's creating inequalities. So they were saying capitalism, this whole markets, allowing markets to self-regulate themselves without the government intervening to, to create incentives for, people to increase their welfare. You're right. The firms, strategies to maximize their profits. So definitely, they are going to pay lower wages, and so that they can have higher profits. And this is what was happening during that era, which is why you've got the laborers pushing back and destroying all the machines, because they're saying, the firms, it's your machines that are causing the inequalities, because if you didn't have the machines, you would need to pay us more to actually produce the goods. But because the machines are now, sort of doing maybe a quarter or half the work, you are lowering our wages, right? So that was the classical economist theory. I see our lunch break is almost coming up, so we'll just end here. What were the limitations, right, of this? Why did the classical economics theory, it's still there, people still use it. Obviously, we all know that output is a function of land and of resources, of the resources that I mentioned. But there were weaknesses in this model, which then the neoclassical theories try to address. So what could possibly be some of the weaknesses with these classical theories? Yes, sir.
Well, one of them is I would think it's the notion behind comparing population growth with, shall I say, food scarcity? Mm-hmm. But that I believe could not be proven.
Yes, they couldn't. Yeah. Yes.
People were in a court of law will say beyond any reasonable doubt.
Yes. Yes.
And again, from a humanitarian point of view, the Malthusian theories proposals
yes.
on how to control that
yes.
were just not so smart.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
because he spoke about sterilization as one of the birth control. So there was no way that was going to continue, right? So the issue with population and population growth, it's a very interesting discussion in economic growth, because there are both sides to the story. That yes, an increasing population is going to put a constraint on your resources, especially if your country is not growing. But your population is important for growth. And in all of the growth theories that we'll cover, labor is always there. But it will always come down to the skill level of your labor. That labor specialization becomes important as well. Yes.
So can we say this theory ignored technological change or technological advancement?
Which one?
Can we say this theory ignored?
Yes. So they knew there's technology, but they didn't understand the role of technology in actually offsetting the diminishing marginal returns to capital. So because they didn't understand where the technology was coming from, or they didn't internalize the technological accumulation within their country, they missed out on a very important aspect, that if you can create this technology within your own country, you can actually use it to produce more from your land. So even if your land is a fixed resource, but technology makes it efficient. Even if your labor is, if you've got, your technology makes your labor efficient as well, because they're able to be innovative, and they're also able to use the new technologies that you're creating in your economy. So you're quite right. That is one of the weaknesses that they talk about, is that they ignored the role of technology. Even though it's part of the model, but they actually ignore the role of it.
In fact, it was ignorance on the part of scaling that population.
Yes.
Let the population grow, but instill skills in that population so that you're able to.
Exactly. Yeah. And, they, in the global north, over the years, the centuries, they became wise and they realized that, actually, technology is a critical input of production, especially for labor and capital accumulation as well. So, so we will continue with our growth theories after lunch. I think it's for 1 hour now, so I'll see you guys at 1:30 to continue.